one of the things that defines Englishness is actually how it sees other people.
Yes, and that's interesting too, because you can't be expected to remember this, but I've met you once before. We were at the Festival of Politics in Edinburgh, in the Scottish Parliament. I was in the chair asking a few questions.
I remember
Really?
that.
Do
you remember that?
Just beforehand, we were in the green room looking out, and we were looking at the flags in front of the Scottish Parliament, and you said, observed at the time, how strange it was that nationalism in Scotland had developed in a different way from nationalism in England, and nationalism in Scotland's it's kind of centre-left. It's a bit cuddly in a way that, say, some of the Catalan nationalists are, whereas English nationalism is very, very different indeed.
Well, they plug into two different things. Firstly, Scottish nationalism is something that's existed for a whole long time and has time to develop its own cultural identity, but also a questioning identity, which I think is really interesting, that Scottish nationalism is also about what does it mean? What does it mean to be civically nationalist rather than sort of like emotionally kind of blood and soil kind of nationalist? So I think that's really interesting. During the last referendum, I think what was fascinating was the fact that actually there was a lot of discussion about what it meant to be Scottish. What do we want? How does it work? What do the commons mean to us? What's this Commonwealth together that we share? And I think that's a really interesting approach to nationalism. English nationalism has a tendency to be more of a spasm.
That's an interesting idea. Do you think
there's a questioning that goes along with Scottish nationalism that doesn't go along with English nationalism? And I think it's from a position of English. The funny thing about English nationalism is it created the Union, and very likely it will break the Union. And it's looking at that. What motors English nationalism? I think is a sense of absence in history.
Now, I'm sure
the English history is a history of absences. It's a history that refuses to examine, working people's history. It's a history that refuses to examine its relationship to slavery or its relationship to empire and what that actually meant. And there's lots of reasons for that. But when you say us, oh man, that's a difficult. Really is a difficult one, especially when it comes to Ireland and North. Because suddenly England sees the Irish as them, but the Northern Irish are our them, unless of course they annoy us when they're them, but when we want them they're ours, but they're still them.
Yes, in Northern Ireland particularly, you've got probably some of the most British people in the United Kingdom there. Their identity is British, the majority population, and yet they're not on the island of Great Britain. And that's where things start to blur at the edges, doesn't it?
I was in Belfast the other week. It was absolutely... I was there before Christmas and before the election. And so I met old Republicans that I have known for a long time who are just sort of saying, I hate Boris Johnson, but half of me wants him to win because of the border down the Irish Sea. Because for them, that's a step forward for a united Ireland. Now, that's amazing. That is amazing that you've got to that situation.